2 years ago, I thought I had found paradise. After 12 years of classified missions and sleepless nights in hostile territories, I finally came home to the quiet suburbs of Maple Ridge. My wife Sarah and I bought a modest two-story house with a white picket fence and a small garden where she grew tomatoes and roses. For the first time since joining the military, I could sleep through the night without listening for footsteps or checking exit routes. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and I had started a small security consulting business. We attended neighborhood barbecues, waved to our neighbors, and lived the American dream I had spent years fighting to protect overseas. The most dangerous thing in our daily routine was Sarah's habit of jogging alone through the nearby park every evening at sunset. That peaceful existence lasted exactly 18 months. Then Margaret Thornfield moved into the neighborhood and became president of the Homeowners Association. Margaret was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to catalog every imperfection in our quiet community. She wore expensive business suits even to casual neighborhood meetings and carried herself like someone who had never been told no in her entire life. Within weeks of taking control of the HOA, she began her campaign of petty tyranny. The first violation notice appeared on our door on a Tuesday morning. Sarah found it when she left for work, a bright yellow paper that accused us of maintaining grass that exceeded the approved height limit by half an inch. I measured our lawn myself with a ruler and found it well within the guidelines, but Margaret had already moved on to her next target. The notices kept coming. Our mailbox was supposedly the wrong shade of black. The small rose bush Sarah had planted near our front steps violated an obscure landscaping regulation. The American flag I flew from a pole in our yard was allegedly too large according to some buried clause in the HOA handbook. Each violation came with a fine and a deadline for compliance. I tried the diplomatic approach first. I attended HOA meetings, spoke calmly about property rights, and presented evidence that we were following all written guidelines. Margaret listened with a cold smile and dismissed every point I made. During one particularly heated exchange, she looked me directly in the eye and said something that should have been a warning. "Mr. Patterson, you seem to think your military service entitles you to special treatment. Let me be clear about something. This is my neighborhood now, and everyone follows my rules. Everyone." I stayed calm, but something in her tone made my old instincts stir. Margaret was not just a petty bureaucrat drunk on power. She was someone who viewed any challenge to her authority as a personal declaration of war. The fact that she had researched my military background meant she was planning something more than harassment. The violations and fines escalated over the following months. Margaret began scheduling surprise inspections of our property, always arriving with her clipboard and measuring tape when Sarah was home alone. She started parking outside our house in the evenings, sitting in her black sedan and watching our windows like a predator studying its prey. The final straw came on a humid Thursday evening in September. I was working in my home office when the doorbell rang. Sarah answered it, and I heard Margaret's voice echoing through our hallway with unusual confidence. "Mrs. Patterson, I trust you and your husband have had time to reconsider your attitude toward community standards. My patience is not unlimited, and there are consequences for continued defiance." I walked to the front door to find Margaret standing on our porch with two men I did not recognize. They were both large, muscular, and wearing leather jackets despite the warm weather. Their eyes scanned our property with the calculating look of professionals assessing a target. "Margaret, what is this about?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the warning bells going off in my head. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Just a friendly reminder that every action has consequences, Mr. Patterson. I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." After they left, Sarah and I stood in our living room trying to process what had just happened. The woman who had been harassing us over grass height and mailbox colors had just brought what looked like hired muscle to our front door. The peaceful suburban life we had built was cracking apart, and I could sense something terrible approaching like a storm on the horizon. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I activated security protocols I had hoped never to use again, and began preparing for a war I never wanted to fight. Sarah disappeared on a Tuesday evening during her regular jog through Riverside Park. She had left the house at 6:30, the same time she went every day, wearing her bright blue running clothes and listening to her favorite podcast. She always took the same route through the park trails and returned home within 45 minutes. That evening, she never came back. By 7:30, my military training kicked in. Sarah was never late, never forgot to call, never deviated from her routines. I grabbed my tactical flashlight and headed to the park, my mind already shifting into operational mode. The transition from worried husband to calculating soldier happened faster than I wanted to admit. I found her abandoned phone first, lying in the dirt about 200 yards from the main trail. The screen was cracked, and the earbuds were tangled in the nearby bushes. 20 feet away, I discovered her water bottle and the small pepper spray she carried for protection. Both items showed signs of being dropped during a struggle. The evidence painted a clear picture. Sarah had been jogging along her usual route when someone approached her from the tree line. The scattered personal items suggested she had tried to fight back before being overpowered and taken. Boot prints in the soft earth indicated at least 3 attackers, all wearing heavy motorcycle boots based on the tread patterns. I called the police immediately, but their response was everything I had feared. The desk sergeant took my information with obvious disinterest, suggesting that Sarah had probably just decided to visit a friend or go shopping without telling me. When I insisted that my wife had been abducted, the officer asked if we had been having marital problems and whether Sarah might have left voluntarily. "Sir, you would be surprised how many missing person reports turn out to be spouses who just needed some space. Give it 24 hours, and she will probably come home on her own." I hung up the phone knowing that official channels would be useless. By the time the police took Sarah's disappearance seriously, it would be too late. I was on my own, which meant falling back on skills I had hoped never to use in civilian life. I spent the next 6 hours conducting a methodical reconnaissance of the area. Using techniques learned during countless Delta Force operations, I mapped every possible approach to the abduction site and cataloged every piece of physical evidence. The boot prints led to a section of the park where motorcycles could access the trail system without being seen from the main road. Security cameras from nearby businesses provided the breakthrough I needed. Footage from a gas station across from the park entrance showed 3 motorcycles leaving the area around the time of Sarah's disappearance. The bikes were older models, heavily modified, and ridden by men wearing full-face helmets and leather jackets. The license plates were obscured, but the distinctive paint jobs and custom exhaust systems would make them identifiable to someone who knew where to look. I was analyzing the footage for the 3rd time when my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but I answered immediately. "Mr. Patterson." The voice was female, calm and familiar, Margaret Thornfield. "Where is my wife?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Your wife is perfectly safe, for now. Her continued well-being depends entirely on your willingness to be reasonable about our neighborhood disagreements." My blood turned to ice. The HOA president who had been harassing us over lawn maintenance had escalated to kidnapping. The woman who spent her days measuring grass and counting rose bushes had crossed a line that most people could never even imagine. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I want you to understand that I am not someone who tolerates defiance. You will withdraw all complaints against the HOA, pay every fine without protest, and make it clear to your neighbors that my authority is absolute. In return, your wife will be returned unharmed." "And if I refuse?" Margaret's laugh was cold and confident. "Mr. Patterson, you seem to think your military background makes you special. Let me assure you that the people holding your wife are not impressed by your resume. They are professionals who understand consequences. I suggest you do not test their patience." The line went dead, leaving me alone in my living room with the horrible realization that everything had changed. This was no longer about HOA violations or neighborhood politics. My wife was in the hands of criminals, and the woman responsible believed she held all the cards. Margaret Thornfield had just made the worst mistake of her life. She had declared war on someone who specialized in winning impossible battles, and she had given me the perfect motivation to destroy everything she had built. The suburban husband was gone, replaced by a Delta Force operator with nothing left to lose. I walked to my bedroom closet and opened the hidden compartment where I kept equipment I had hoped never to touch again. It was time to remind some very dangerous people why they should never underestimate a quiet man with a deadly past. Finding the motorcycle gang required skills I had spent years perfecting in hostile territories overseas. I started with the security footage, using facial recognition software I had acquired through military contacts to identify the riders. Two of the three men were already in the system: Marcus "Razor" Henley, a career criminal with arrests for assault and drug trafficking, and Tommy Valdez, his lieutenant with a record of armed robbery and extortion. The third rider remained unidentified, but I had enough information to begin tracking their movements. Military surveillance techniques adapted for suburban environments allowed me to trace their routes through the city without alerting them to my presence. These men were professionals, but they were not military professionals. They had no idea they were being hunted by someone with superior training and unlimited motivation. I spent 3 days mapping their operations. The gang operated out of a series of bars and pool halls on the industrial side of town, places where cash changed hands and nobody asked questions. Their primary source of income appeared to be protection rackets and debt collection, exactly the kind of services that someone like Margaret would need to enforce her will. The financial connection between Margaret and the gang required deeper investigation. Using techniques learned during intelligence operations, I accessed bank records and traced money transfers that painted a clear picture of their relationship. Margaret had been paying the gang for months, initially for small intimidation jobs against other homeowners who had challenged her authority. My wife's kidnapping was just the latest escalation in a pattern of escalating violence. The paper trail led me to a shell company that Margaret used to funnel money to the gang without creating obvious connections to her personal accounts. The amounts were substantial, suggesting that she had been planning something like this for a long time. Every payment was documented, every transaction recorded, building a case that would eventually destroy her if I could rescue Sarah and survive to present it. Finding their compound required old-fashioned reconnaissance work. I followed gang members from their usual haunts to a remote location outside the city limits, an abandoned industrial complex surrounded by chain-link fencing and security cameras. The facility had once been a manufacturing plant, but now it served as headquarters for criminal operations that operated in the shadows of legitimate society. The compound was well defended but not impregnable. The gang had installed motion detectors and surveillance equipment, but their security measures were designed to deter casual intruders, not trained military operators. From a concealed position half a mile away, I used military-grade optics to study their routines and identify weaknesses in their defensive setup. I counted at least 8 men at the compound, all armed and dangerous, but following predictable patterns that revealed their lack of professional training. They changed guard rotations at regular intervals, took smoke breaks at the same times each day, and left blind spots in their surveillance coverage that could be exploited by someone who understood tactical movement. The most important discovery came on the third day of surveillance. Through a high-powered scope, I spotted Sarah being moved between buildings. She was alive but clearly injured, walking with a limp and favoring her left side. The sight of my wife in captivity ignited a rage that I had to carefully control. Emotional reactions got people killed in hostile situations, and Sarah needed me to be a soldier, not an angry husband. My tactical planning revealed several possible approaches to the compound. A direct assault would be suicide against 8 armed men, but stealth infiltration offered better odds of success. The key was timing the operation for maximum effect while minimizing risk to Sarah. I needed to neutralize the guards without raising alarms, locate and extract my wife, and escape before reinforcements could arrive. The internal struggle between legal and military solutions kept me awake for nights. Every instinct told me to call federal authorities and present the evidence I had gathered, but Margaret's corruption network extended into local law enforcement. The wrong phone call could get Sarah killed and allow the criminals to escape justice. I was faced with a choice between following the law and saving my wife's life. The decision became clear when I intercepted radio communications between the compound and Margaret's team. They were planning to move Sarah to a more secure location within 24 hours, somewhere I might never find her. The window for rescue was closing rapidly, and official channels would take too long to produce results. I made the call that changed everything. Sarah's life was worth more than my comfort with legal procedures. I would go in alone, extract my wife, and deal with the consequences later. The suburban husband had to become a one-man army, and the clock was ticking toward a confrontation that would test every skill I had learned in 12 years of military service. That night, I prepared for war. Margaret's confidence grew with each passing day. The phone calls came every few hours, each one more threatening than the last. She had clearly convinced herself that she held all the power in our situation, that a scared suburban husband would eventually cave to her demands rather than risk his wife's safety. "Mr. Patterson, I hope you are considering my offer seriously. Sarah is becoming quite expensive to maintain, and my associates are not known for their patience with long-term arrangements." I let her talk while recording every word. Each threat was additional evidence that would eventually destroy her, assuming I could keep Sarah alive long enough to present it. Margaret's arrogance was working in my favor, leading her to reveal details about her operation that a smarter criminal would have kept secret. The breakthrough came when I managed to install surveillance equipment near the compound. Hidden cameras and listening devices revealed the true scope of Margaret's corruption network. The gang was not just holding Sarah for ransom. They were preparing to eliminate both of us permanently to protect Margaret's position in the community. Sarah's condition was deteriorating according to intercepted communications. The gang members were growing tired of guarding a hostage, and their conversations revealed increasing frustration with the situation. Margaret had promised them easy money for intimidating a suburban couple, but the extended kidnapping was stretching their resources and patience. My attempt to involve federal authorities proved as futile as expected. The FBI agent I contacted was professionally courteous but skeptical of my claims. Without concrete proof of interstate commerce or federal jurisdiction, the Bureau could not immediately intervene. The agent promised to look into the matter and get back to me within a few days. Sarah did not have a few days. Radio intercepts revealed that the gang was planning to move her within 48 hours, possibly to a location where she would never be found. The window for rescue was closing, and official channels were failing when I needed them most. The corruption extended deeper than I had imagined. Financial records revealed that Police Chief Robert Morrison had been receiving monthly payments from Margaret's shell company for over a year. The money was disguised as consulting fees for security services, but the timing aligned perfectly with the escalation of HOA enforcement actions against challenging homeowners. My last hope for official support disappeared when I discovered that Morrison had been actively sabotaging investigations into Margaret's activities. Missing person reports had been delayed or misfiled. Complaints about HOA harassment had been dismissed as civil matters, and evidence of criminal activity had been buried in administrative paperwork. Sarah's escape attempt happened on the fourth night of her captivity. Surveillance footage showed her breaking free from her restraints and making it almost to the compound's perimeter fence before being recaptured. The gang's response was swift and brutal. They increased security measures and made it clear that another escape attempt would have severe consequences. The sight of my wife being dragged back to her prison cell broke something inside me that I had been struggling to control. The patient husband trying to work within the system was gone, replaced by a Delta Force operator with a mission that transcended legal boundaries. Sarah had shown incredible courage, and I could not let her sacrifice be wasted. My final preparations began that night. I retrieved equipment from hidden storage locations, cleaned and tested weapons I had hoped never to use again, and reviewed tactical procedures for solo rescue operations. The mission would require precision, speed, and absolute commitment to success regardless of personal cost. The phone call that sealed Margaret's fate came at midnight on the fifth day. Her voice carried a different tone, colder and more final than her previous threats. "Mr. Patterson, my patience has reached its limit. You have until tomorrow evening to comply with my demands, or Sarah will disappear permanently. I suggest you make the right choice." I listened to her ultimatum without emotion, calculating distances, timing, and resources needed for the operation I was about to launch. Margaret thought she was delivering a death sentence, but she was actually giving me the final piece of information I needed to plan her destruction. "Margaret," I said quietly, "you have no idea what you have started." The line went dead, and I began my final preparations. Tomorrow night, the suburban husband would disappear forever, replaced by a Delta Force operator on a mission to save his wife and destroy everyone who had threatened her. The storm was about to break, and Margaret Thornfield was standing directly in its path. The compound looked different through night vision goggles. Every shadow became a potential threat, every movement a calculated risk. I had been watching the facility for 6 hours, memorizing guard rotations and identifying the weaknesses in their security that would allow me to reach Sarah without triggering alarms that could get her killed. The infiltration began at 2:30 in the morning, when the guards were at their least alert, and the compound had settled into its nighttime routine. I moved through the darkness like a ghost, using skills perfected during countless operations in hostile territories, where a single mistake meant death for me and my team. The perimeter fence was the first obstacle. The gang had installed motion detectors and cameras, but their coverage had gaps that could be exploited by someone who understood how to move invisibly through defended positions. I cut through the chain link at a point where shadows from nearby trees would conceal my entry, then sealed the opening behind me to avoid detection. The first guard was smoking a cigarette behind the main building, his attention focused on his phone rather than his surroundings. I approached from his blind spot, moving silently across concrete that would have betrayed a less experienced operative. The chokehold was applied with surgical precision, cutting off blood flow to his brain without crushing his windpipe. He collapsed unconsciously within seconds, and I zip-tied his hands before dragging him into the shadows. Two more guards were eliminated in similar fashion as I worked my way toward the building where Sarah was being held. Each neutralization required patience and perfect timing, waiting for the right moment when other guards were distracted or out of position. The non-lethal approach was slower but necessary to avoid escalating the situation before I could secure my wife's safety. The building's interior was a maze of corridors and rooms that had been hastily converted from industrial space into makeshift living quarters. I moved through the darkness using memorized floor plans created during days of surveillance, my footsteps silent on concrete floors that would have echoed under normal circumstances. I found Sarah in a storage room at the rear of the building, bound to a metal chair with rope and duct tape. Her face was bruised, and dried blood marked where they had struck her during the failed escape attempt. But her eyes were alert and defiant, showing the same fighting spirit that had attracted me to her years ago. "Sarah," I whispered, cutting through her restraints with a tactical knife, "can you walk?" She nodded, though I could see the effort it took for her to stand. The gang had hurt her, but they had not broken her spirit. That realization filled me with both relief and cold rage that I channeled into tactical focus. "Stay behind me and do exactly what I say," I instructed, helping her to her feet. "We are leaving now." The extraction proved more complicated than the infiltration. Sarah's injuries slowed our movement, and we had to take a longer route to avoid guards who were beginning to notice their missing colleagues. Every step was calculated to minimize noise and avoid detection, but time was running out before someone discovered the unconscious guards. The confrontation I had been trying to avoid finally came as we approached the exit. Razor himself emerged from the main office, armed with a shotgun and flanked by two of his men. The gang leader was bigger than he had appeared in surveillance photos, covered in tattoos and scars that told the story of a lifetime spent in violent confrontations. "Well, well," Razor said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never met a more dangerous predator. "The suburban hero comes to rescue his wife. This is going to be fun." I stepped in front of Sarah, calculating angles and distances with the precision of a man who had survived similar situations in much more dangerous environments. 3 armed men against one, but they were criminals who relied on intimidation rather than training. I was a Delta Force operator with nothing left to lose. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. I moved with explosive speed, using hand-to-hand combat techniques that turned their superior numbers into a disadvantage. Razor went down first, his shotgun spinning away as I broke his wrist and delivered a knockout blow to his jaw. His men followed quickly, their weapons useless against an opponent who had been trained to fight multiple attackers in close quarters. While they lay unconscious on the concrete floor, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find linking the gang to Margaret's operation. Financial records, communications, and weapons that would connect them to kidnapping, conspiracy, and corruption charges that would destroy everyone involved. The escape from the compound was a race against time as backup gang members began arriving at the facility. I carried Sarah to the vehicle I had positioned for extraction, my mind already planning our route to safety and the evidence presentation that would expose Margaret's crimes to federal authorities. Behind us, the compound erupted in chaos as the gang discovered their operation had been completely dismantled by a single man they had underestimated. The suburban husband was gone, replaced by a Delta Force operator who had reminded everyone involved why some sleeping giant should never be awakened. Sarah was safe, the evidence was secured, and Margaret Thornfield's reign of terror was about to end in spectacular fashion. Margaret's phone call came at 6 in the morning, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. The carefully controlled HOA president who had terrorized our neighborhood for months was gone, replaced by a woman who had just discovered that her criminal empire had been completely destroyed by someone she had dismissed as a helpless suburban husband. "What have you done?" she screamed into the phone. "Do you have any idea what you have unleashed?" I let her rage for a few moments before responding with the calm voice of someone who held all the cards. "Margaret, I have evidence of your kidnapping conspiracy, your corruption network, and your payment of criminal organizations to terrorize homeowners. The FBI will receive everything within the hour." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Margaret was finally understanding that her reign of terror had consequences, and those consequences were about to destroy everything she had built through years of intimidation and abuse of power. The evidence package I delivered to federal authorities was comprehensive and devastating. Financial records showed the flow of money from Margaret's accounts to the criminal organization. Recorded phone calls captured her direct involvement in the kidnapping plot. Security footage documented the gang's activities and their connection to Margaret's harassment campaign against neighborhood residents. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Collins reviewed the evidence with the professional attention of someone who had seen similar corruption cases before. Unlike the local police who had dismissed my concerns, Agent Collins understood immediately that Margaret's operation represented a federal crime with serious implications for community safety. "Mr. Patterson, this is exactly the kind of systematic corruption that falls under federal jurisdiction. We will be making arrests within 24 hours." Margaret's desperate attempts to destroy evidence and silence witnesses only made her situation worse. She began making frantic phone calls to gang members who were already in custody, trying to coordinate a cover-up that was impossible to execute. Every phone call was monitored and recorded, providing additional evidence of obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. The HOA emergency meeting that followed was unlike anything our quiet neighborhood had ever experienced. Margaret had called the meeting to try to regain control of the narrative, but she walked into a room full of homeowners who had finally learned the truth about their tyrannical leader. I presented the evidence to the assembled neighbors, revealing how Margaret had used their HOA fees to fund a criminal conspiracy against anyone who challenged her authority. The room erupted in anger as residents realized they had been funding their own oppression through monthly payments to a woman who saw them as subjects rather than neighbors. "For months, you have been paying Margaret Thornfield to harass, intimidate, and terrorize anyone who questioned her authority," I explained to the shocked crowd. "Your money funded the kidnapping of my wife and the corruption of local officials who were supposed to protect our community." The community uprising was swift and decisive. Homeowners who had been too afraid to challenge Margaret individually found strength in numbers as they demanded her immediate resignation and the complete reform of the HOA system. The woman who had ruled through fear discovered that her power evaporated the moment her crimes became public knowledge. Margaret's arrest happened during the emergency meeting, federal agents entering the community center to take her into custody, while the entire neighborhood watched. The woman who had spent years terrorizing homeowners over minor violations was handcuffed and led away facing federal charges that would likely result in decades in prison. The collapse of Margaret's corruption network extended far beyond the HOA. Police Chief Morrison was arrested the same day, along with 3 other municipal officials who had been receiving payments to ignore or suppress complaints about Margaret's activities. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that had allowed one woman's tyranny to flourish unchecked for years. The gang members who had kidnapped Sarah received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years in federal prison. Razor himself was convicted on multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and racketeering, ensuring that he would never again threaten innocent families for money. Margaret's trial became a media sensation, highlighting the dangers of unchecked authority in suburban communities across the country. Her conviction on federal charges including kidnapping conspiracy, corruption, and witness intimidation resulted in a 30-year prison sentence that effectively ended her ability to harm anyone ever again. The evidence had spoken with undeniable clarity. A woman who had believed herself untouchable discovered that money and connections could not protect her from the consequences of her actions when those actions crossed the line into federal crimes. Justice had been served not through vigilante action, but through the methodical presentation of evidence by someone who understood how to fight corruption at its source. Margaret Thornfield's reign of terror was over, and our community could finally begin the process of healing from the damage she had inflicted through years of systematic abuse of power. 6 months later, Sarah and I sat on our front porch watching the sunset paint our neighborhood in golden light. Her physical injuries had healed completely, but the emotional scars would take longer to fade. The kidnapping had changed both of us in ways we were still discovering, but it had also strengthened our bond in ways I never could have imagined. Our small garden had grown into something beautiful during Sarah's recovery. She had thrown herself into nurturing the plants and flowers, finding peace in the simple act of helping things grow. The roses she had planted despite Margaret's objections now bloomed in brilliant colors that brightened our entire yard. Margaret's trial had ended with her conviction on all counts, resulting in a 30-year federal prison sentence that ensured she would never again terrorize innocent families. The courtroom had been packed with neighborhood residents who had come to witness the final chapter of her reign of terror. Many of them had testified about years of harassment and intimidation they had endured in silence. The HOA itself had been completely reformed under new leadership that prioritized community cooperation over authoritarian control. The new board members were neighbors we had known for years, people who understood that their role was to serve the community rather than rule it. Property values had actually increased as word spread that Maple Ridge was now a place where families could live in peace. My security consulting business had grown as other communities sought advice on preventing the kind of corruption that had nearly destroyed our neighborhood. I found purpose in helping ordinary people protect themselves from those who would abuse positions of trust and authority. The military skills I had hoped never to use again had found a new mission in civilian life. The experience had taught me that the most important battles are often fought not on distant battlefields, but in our own communities against those who would use power to harm innocent people. My Delta Force training had been essential in saving Sarah, but the real victory came through evidence, testimony, and the courage of neighbors who finally stood up to a bully. Sarah resumed her nursing career with a new appreciation for the fragility of life and the importance of community support. Her colleagues at the hospital had rallied around us during the crisis, and their friendship had been crucial to her recovery. She often spoke about how the experience had reminded her why she had chosen a profession dedicated to healing. Our evenings were peaceful now, filled with simple pleasures like gardening, reading, and talking with neighbors who had become genuine friends through shared struggle. The American dream I had fought to protect overseas was alive and well in our small corner of suburbia, defended not by military might, but by ordinary people who refused to let evil triumph. The white picket fence still surrounded our property, but it no longer felt like a barrier between us and the world. It was simply the boundary of a home where love had triumphed over hate, where justice had prevailed over corruption, and where two people had discovered that the most important battles are worth fighting regardless of the cost. Peace was not just the absence of conflict. It was the presence of justice, community, and hope for the future.